Thanks so much for joining our webinar on managing cyber incidents, a people-centric approach. I'm Andy Paness here with Charlie Maclean-Bristol, our director, who will be leading us through the session today. Just as a couple of bits of housekeeping before we get going. So as a brief introduction, as advertised, the session in its entirety will be 45 minutes, but we'll be sticking strictly to 30 minutes for the presentation itself, and then 15 minutes of Q&A straight away afterwards. So any questions, we've already received some, which is fantastic, but any more that come through, type them into the box on the right-hand side, and we'll pick those up at the end. And then, most importantly, everyone's favorite question, the slides and resources from today's webinar, including the recording, will be shared straight away after the session. So you'll be able to receive those and have a look through at your own leisure. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Charlie.
Hello, good afternoon. So Charlie Maclean-Bristol. If anyone, if you don't know me already, so Charlie Maclean-Bristol, I'm a director at Data Barracks, Plan B, we've just been acquired by Data Barracks about a year ago. My own background is military, followed by emergency planning at Anglian Water, business continuity at Scottish Power, and then I founded Plan B Consulting 18 years ago. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on with what you've come for today. So what I want to do is, my agenda is really talk about the sort of the people aspect of cybersecurity, and I want to go through sort of 5 different roles. So you can see me: incident crisis managers down to the person who clicked on the link, and I want to have a sort of talk through of what are the key issues for those people, and how can we make sure we look after them and make sure they're taken care of in a cyber incident. As we know that cybersecurity is inseparable from human behavior, and the fact is that yes, machines will work 24/7. You can set them on the way, and as long as nothing happens, they'll keep on going until they're told to stop. Human beings don't work like that, and I think often in cybersecurity, it's all about tech, or the more enlightened people realize it's not all about tech. But I think cybersecurity is inseparable from humans, and we need to take that into account. So do we think enough of people? Are people just treated like machines? And I think sometimes, you know, a lot of the focus on cybersecurity is all about that technical response, and we don't think too much about the actual humans behind it. And I think the NCSC, I was there at a conference a couple of years ago, and they were starting to talk about this, but it did amuse me to say I was looking for NCSC guidance, because they had pushed some guidance about looking after your staff and looking after people responding, and their website page was maintaining a sustainable, strengthened cybersecurity posture, which is actually looking after your people there, so that not even them are kind of framing it in an easily findable way to kind of think about the people, but at least they're thinking about it. But as we said, traditional response will focus on IT recovery, not self-staff well-being, and so we need to build that in there. And I think, you know, you can read that: trust, morale, decision-making quality during chaos. The more we look after the staff, the more sharper our staff, the more, I'm not saying relaxed, but I mean non-stressed our staff are, the better decisions, the more they're going to absorb information, and hopefully the better our response. So if we can build that into our response, we're going to get a better cyber response. You know, we need to park how they got in and should they have got in and all the rest of it. We're now thinking about, they got into our systems, you know, like Marks and Spencer's, Co-op, Glasgow City Council was just down the road from me today. You know, they will get in. So how can we make sure that by including our people in there, we get a response? And I think I spoke to a ransomware negotiator, and I've read a couple of things on ransomware negotiators. These are professional people whose job it is to, if you think you're going to have to or want to pay, they're extremely used people because they're used to negotiating with ransomware people. So that's their job. But one of the things they talked about was that, I don't know if any of you been burgled. I've luckily, touch wood, so far not been, but there is a kind of feeling of violation. It's, this is your safe place. How dare they do that? And there's anger, and they talk about how a lot of people, when they're faced with a cybersecurity incident, have anger against the people who did it, the hackers. How did they do that? Dare this to me? We're a good organization. We're good people. We do a good job. We provide lots of, we make money for our investors or our founders or whoever makes the money for, we got good people working there. How dare they do this to us? And especially, if you're a healthcare or a charity or looking after children in a hospital, your organization's doing good work. And I think it can be quite emotional, and I think people forget about that emotional. It can be emotional on the staff, emotional on the senior managers. And I think if we recognize that, say, a cyber incident is an emotional response and brings out an emotional response, in the same way as if it was a flood or a fire or there were casualties, then I think we're going a long way to think about actually how do we look after our people and get the best out of them there and make sure that they're not long-lastingly affected by this. When I teach cybersecurity or cyber incident management, I divide it into 4 bits. There's always the IT technical response, but to me, the battle is won and lost, perhaps not in the IT technical response, but it's one about the reputation of stakeholder management. So do you get those communications right, or do you not get those communication right? Have you done all your statutory reporting, your ICO, your GDPR reporting? So are you doing that? And continuity of operations, how do you make sure your operations continue? Now, most of those 3, bar the IT technical response, are the preserve of your crisis management team, your incident management team, major incident management team, whatever you like to call them. So those are the people. So let's think about them and think about what they need. So there's a separation technical response. So they are purely going to be hopefully looking outward, looking at your reputation, looking at your stakeholders, inward back to your staff. So that is going to be their role. And if you think about for senior managers, this is almost their doomsday scenario. You can be quite a well-established organization, things are really running well, and a ransomware comes and it locks out your entire system, locks out your entire files, and if your backups are not properly configured, then it can lose all your backups as well, and you basically don't have a business. So they're under a lot of stress because this is the doomsday scenario. This is for many of them, this is as bad as it's ever going to get. And they are trying to work with limited information because, forensics take a long time to do, and they're trying to find out what's going on and what is the impact. There is decision fatigue. You're taking lots of decisions under pressure, limited information, and of every one of those decisions can come back to haunt you. There's hindsight. So, you're under a lot of pressure there. You're going to be working long hours. Are you going to be working 18-hour shifts? Are you going to be 17-hour shifts because you're dealing with this thing? Or might you be doing 2 shifts? So you do 12 hours, hand out another 12 hours. But you're working a lot of time, and there's many competing pressures on you. So what are the needs of the stakeholders? What are the needs of the people whose information has been lost? What's the regulator? What's your owner? What's government? What's the media? So there's a lot of pressure on you. And again, lots of prioritization. So it is which system bring back first, which brings bring last back. If we bring that back, these people are going to be annoyed. If we bring that back, those people are going to be annoyed. And actually, maybe we want to not bring back one system, we want to bring 5 systems back, which is going to take longer, but we're going to make sure they're all in sync when we recover them. So there is a lot of those prioritizations. And all behind you, if you get this wrong, you're going to lose your job. And if you're probably a senior manager and it's big and bad enough, you might lose your job anyway, regardless of how well you do. So there is, and then there's the sort of technical CISOs and CTOs and all them who are busy looking at their jobs as well. So a lot of pressure on your crisis managers there. 2 shifts help. So if you get 2 shifts there, that's if you're working 24/7. So a lot of pressure on those people. And I think there isn't any way around it. We'll talk about some mitigation, but there isn't really much way around it. I think it's almost like they need to recognize that they're in this in the long haul, because 2-3 years is the time takes to total recover from these events if they're really big and bad. So they need to understand. I think if they're mentally prepared, I think that goes a reasonable long way to dealing with it. So if we go on to the next one. Right, in terms of technical response, this is where I've seen most or sort of heard the most tales of kind of burnouts, because with your IT people who are responding, you've got limited numbers of skills. As you don't have hundreds of IT people, or may not have hundreds of IT people, but the really skilled people, really people who understand their systems, they're usually limited in numbers. So they're going to be working very, very long hours to try and recover. It's their system, so they're not being forced to do it, but it is really important. And there is that long tail of response, the 2-3 years. Some organizations, like Hackney, I understand, is they still haven't got their systems back 100%, and that was years ago. Some of their not their compliance system, the conveyancing systems. So there is, after the cameras have moved on and the stories moves on, there are IT people dealing with this a very long time, and they're trying to put workarounds, and they're trying to make the systems work. So we had to recognize long tail. A couple of stories I heard about burnout on this thing. There's a very good interview, a YouTube with the guy who ran the response at Maersk, who was like CTO or CIO or one of that, and Maersk, and this was the non-petty in 2017, and they basically lost all their systems. There's a very good Wired article about it as well, about how they were having to re-image 14,000 computers. And you got a container ship coming into port with 20,000 containers, and there's 3 miles of lorries waiting to pick up the containers, and Maersk had no idea of what's in that container and who's coming to pick it up. So massive logistic problem. But the guy talks about he was working on this thing almost non-stop for 6 months, and then had a heart attack in the middle and was off for 3 months recovering. So that was a sort of physiological response to working all those hours. And we had a very interesting guy, one of my courses from the Irish Health organization, and when they had the sort of total wipeout or their lockout of the entire Irish health system, all the kind of responders were working together in, I think it was a nuclear bunker, sort of underground, and they were all working. They were working for months and months and months on trying to put the healthcare system back together and sort out the incident. And one of the things he talked about was in that bunker, they had ambulances come 5 times, of which 2 were real heart attacks and 3 were suspected heart attacks. And he used to say by the end of it, they had paramedics visiting the center twice a day, and they had compulsory time out. So they had to go up into the light and say, you will take an hour off at lunch and you will not come back until you've had your hour. And they were having to, these people are dedicated health service. It has a real life impact upon people, so are dedicated to working. But they had burnout on this, and they recognized it by the end and was having these compulsory time out. So I think it is, recognize the issue, recognize as it is an issue, do the timeouts. So maybe do the timeouts during the day when actually it's compulsory. You must go from your desk and I want you to go and walk outside for half an hour, and you're not to come back in until that, get the security guard not let you back in again. But also time out of, you have a day off a week, or you must take the weekends, or you're doing shifts, so you get one day off every 5 days, or whatever it is, so that compulsory time out. And then, are you widening that knowledge pool so that people actually understand what you on the system? So it's not just you or a couple of people who really understand the systems. You're spreading those skill sets there. And then, can you make better use of third parties as they come in? Can you get extra people with maybe not expertise in your specifics, how you're set up, but maybe they can provide extra hands, extra help for doing some of the more, not menial, but simpler tasks, which can be done with skills as opposed to specific skills there. So think about your technical response. And I think that's the key, if anything to take away, one of the things to take away from this, is focus on your technical response and make sure that people can recognize stress in people, and to put in a regime of making sure that you look after those people and do it from the beginning there. This was one just from the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. There's some good reports on their website, so it's well worth having a look at it. But one of the key bits, heavy reliance on goodwill of staff. And, if you haven't got goodwill of staff, then you've got some issues, or it's going to make it more difficult. Your staff communication is, again, lots of reading on this, is going to be a big determinant on how quick and how successful your response. Get your staff on side. They can be the greatest advocates of your organization. They will go the extra mile, but you need to bring them on board, and you need to treat them like grown-ups to make sure that actually you get the best out of them. So your staff communications is critical. We have always this issue about secrecy, is to say, how much do you let them know? How much do you let them know they've got a security incident? Now, I think Glasgow City Council, they had the incident Thursday, and it was broken Wednesday, yesterday, or day before. So, did the staff know, and did all staff know but didn't get late to the papers, or was it just the IT staff there? So you have to balance this idea of secrecy, but then if you tell staff, how likely it is to leak there? Or will they just know because they haven't got any systems, and they're going to go and say, well, everyone knows it's a cyber incident because nothing works, so there's obviously something wrong there. So think about the secrecy there. Ransom notes, if there's a ransom note, I've heard stories of going on all the computers at the same time, so it's obvious that there's a ransom note there. I've also heard of stories in the post office where they didn't have very good relationships with their staff when they had the Post Office International Parcel Cyber event. Ransom notes came off the computer, and within 5 minutes, someone had taken a picture of it, and put it on social media. So again, that's bad relationships with staff, but you have to be prepared for that to happen. If you know that could happen, then at least you can think about it in terms of your communications, your incident management team there. And some guidance there, clear, timely, internal comms. If you don't have the answer, it's just important to get staff out there what you know and get them on board and tell them. And I think, we talked about at the very beginning about this, the emotional response of having a cyber attack. So you need your communications need to be empathetic. You need to say, I know you're working long hours. I know you can't deliver the service you want to do it because you've got dedicated staff who like delivering good service. You know, make sure your communications to them are empathetic, not just cold, yeah, we had a cyber attack, we hope you're going to do the best kind of thing. Had to think about manual workarounds. Now, this comes back to business continuity. Have your staff, we should do for your business continuity, if possible, have your manual workarounds. So have you got them in place, and do staff know how to do them, or is it in the business continuity plan, but no one really knows how to do it? There is difficulty with what happens if the staff can't work or a section of staff can't work? What can you do with them? And, you know, I've heard of cases of staff, I think it was in the SEPA report, where staff were really frustrated because they wanted to help, they wanted to do something, but there was nothing for them to do because they didn't have any PCs. So do think about somewhere in your plans or somewhere written down, say, actually, are there some tasks you can get staff to do, which might be menial, or it might even be not their jobs, but is there something they can do to help? And then that can keep them involved. That will make them feel better, and you can get some of the tasks done. And, you know, do you need to reassure them as staff about whether they're going to lose their jobs or not? So that can be important there. So interested parties there. So these are your sort of stakeholders. And the first thing you need to think about it, or what is your obligation to tell them? Do you have to tell them and don't want to tell them? And I think, you know, if you have an incident and you have a lot of stakeholders, then, you know, do you want to splash your dirty laundry all over the place and tell them, oh, we've got a cyber incident? So I think you have to be thinking through what is the impact, and how do you have to tell them or not? And I think there is a kind of moral reason there. So if they could, and that's the harm v convenience, if they could do something about it, or you've lost their data, or there's an impact on them, or they can do something to protect themselves, I think you've very much got a moral obligation to tell them. And that's either your customers, whose data could be lost, or your organization could have lost somebody else's data because you process it on their behalf. So I think you have to think very strongly through, is if you have a ransomware attack, is who you're going to tell and who you're not going to tell. Now, it might be just on depending on the circumstances, but I think again in your exercises, that is one of the things that you should be thinking through. And as I said, if there is harm to them, then you should be taking them out. And then, you know, it's the convenience there is to say, do you still offer the service with them or do you not? And I think again with interested parties, the empathy and communications. I was having a look at the Glasgow City communications, just the initial statement. Often statements are always letting empathy. You know, we understand it is difficult or scary if your data is out there. We understand that, you know, if we're processing data on your behalf, your customers are going to be very anxious or angry or whatever. So I think empathy needs to be a key component communication. And again, it gets, you know, anything with computers, you say, oh, well, it's sort of all technical. It doesn't need to be. It does have that emotional response. So do think about those emotions there and getting that appropriately. And, you know, if you let your lawyers on the communications, fine, you may need to let your lawyers on the communications, but, you know, does that kind of dry up any of the empathy there as well? And people at 100 yards can spot a kind of communications written by lawyers. So does that help or does it not? In terms of high and low file strategies, if you're on the whole a B2B customer, and you're quite a niche bit. Of course, you need to tell your key customers, but you might not want to splash this all over. We've had to tell the BBC, we got press statements all over your website. You might not want to do that. So that's what I call a sort of low profile strategy, is tell those who you need to do, but actually don't tell anyone else unless you really have to. There's a couple of cases I looked at. One of them was sort of Funky Pigeon, which is a B2C business, but they didn't, on their website, they said they had IT issues. They didn't refer to a cyber incident, and the only way you could actually see they had a cyber incident was sort of delving right the way down into the back end of their kind of like news, or their sort of where it is their notification. Could you find details of the cyber incident, but it wasn't there if you weren't looking for it. Where other organizations, like if you are quite a B2C bit, is to have a banner on the front page and said, here's further details about our cyber incident. And that's a high profile strategy, because it's obvious anyone who goes onto your website, then they can see that it is there, even if they hadn't heard about the incident. So again, is maybe part of your practice, or maybe it's part of your pre-planning, is to think about how you're going to do this in terms of the strategies. I like the idea, and I teach in some crisis comms training, is round about this stakeholder mapping. So mapping out, because each incident is different, who are your stakeholders firstly, and making sure it's just not your crisis level stakeholders, all the stakeholders right the way down. And then in terms of your mapping, is go and say, who do we really, really care about, and who has power to make this incident really has power to make this successful or not, which goes to the sort of Boston Matrix top right hand corner, and who do we not really care that much. They're not going to really help us manage this incident well, but we might need to keep them informed. So those are the different people there. So you do your Boston matrix of key ones here, not so important there, and the two opposite bits. But I think that is a good practice. Again, looking at your state, it's good incident management practice and all things. Looking at stakeholders, really focusing on who do I need to do that, and also thinking about their information requirement. So if you've got a data breach, you need to put together information of how people can protect themselves. There was some quite good stuff on Glasgow actually about, if you receive a call from someone who's pretending to be from us, be careful about it. So do think through that, informing people, and maybe even getting those communications at risk in advance, because again, the better the information, the quicker you can get information, the more your interested parties are going to feel that you really care about them. And if you do the classic thing like various companies do, of say we haven't lost any data, and then 2 weeks later they have to admit it, and it takes them another 3 months to get a letter out to you, it really gives the feeling that they don't really care about you as a customer, because they haven't really thought about this, communicated that, and it's almost like it's been dragged out of them. Think about information requirement, but you still got to try and maintain your brand reputation at the same time. So there's always a balance to be had there. So that's your interested parties. Yeah, so I think this is the bit about, it's important if people click on a link or do something that you actually get people to tell you, because there's nothing worse than someone say they get a sort of ransomware screen, all they do is shut the computer on Friday night and hope it's gone away on Sunday, and the organization could have known 2 days earlier, but they're afraid of being sacked, or they're afraid of being something, so I better not report it and I hope it goes away. So this is the guilty person. And this was an interesting dilemma which we got from one of our Scottish government clients. 'Cause I never really thought about it this time. They had a security incident, not major, which and you normally can understand is you can track back to who clicked on the link and what the link was, and you can see where the original link was in, or you're going to get some of the more phishing where they ring you up and they try and trick you in that way. So that's maybe even more obvious how they got in that way. But how do you then treat that person? How do you deal with that person? So obviously they are the guilty person because they clicked on the link, but how do you see? So they're going to have guilt and fear as well. They're going to be fear of being sacked. And have you got the right atmosphere or the right sort of culture to feel that they're prepared to come forward and say, I think I've just clicked on a link, I'm not sure what it is, but didn't look good to me. Perhaps that's better than hoping that it goes away and or the link they clicked on is actually not a bad link anyway there. So there's going to be guilt and fear there. And it's that question of, do you sack them because they clicked a link, or do you re-educate them? Because obviously we haven't got enough training. That's why they're still clicking on the link. So there's a balance there to be had, and I don't think there's an easy answer to this one. Maybe you have a corporate culture to say everyone who clicks a link gets sacked. Maybe that's the way to do it, or maybe you do the re-education. Say is obviously our training is good enough. And if you're going to suspend that person and make an investigation, what is your duty of care to that person? Because they could be terrified. They could be, they care about the organization. They could see all the impact their action has taken. If it's a healthcare and people can't get their bloods, or like the Irish healthcare was wiped out the entire Irish healthcare system. I'm sure any of us who clicked on that link or known that it was them then would feel a lot of guilt and angst about it. So how do we deal with that duty of care? And our employers have a duty of care to us. So maybe some procedures, some thoughts, play it out in exercise, play it out in training, and think about how you did. And the sort of question is that, can you say, did that person get enough education? Did they get enough phishing email things where it comes to see you click on the links, or did you do one a year ago? You've had the box ticked, and have you done enough? So there is back to that thing. Have you done enough, and how you treat that person? And you're coming to the last one there. So my takeaways from this is, add this guidance to your plans, put it somewhere in there. So as people go through the checklist, they pull it out of their response, you need to have some guidance there. Might just be guidance, things to think about, but it's there somewhere. And I think you need to put it in the guidance. As I said, their guidance from the beginning is to make sure it's thought about up front. It's not thought about a month into the incident and everyone's flagging and you've had 3 people go off sick with stress and actually you're running out of people. If you had managed that better, that couldn't happen there. And I think that next bit about mental health first aiders, there is a wider bit beyond cyber about mental health in work, mental health during incidents, and if we could have maybe mental health first aiders, people can pick this up and maybe you bring them in for incidents, but they're there in the organization, and then maybe it can be help with your cultural as well, is make sure people know, or even it's just something on your plan, say, how do we recognize stress in each other? How do we realize someone's just about to fall over? Let's build that into the plan. And, cyber is a mental health issue. Yep, it is. And don't forget that sort of emotional impact or emotional response to the attack there. play these things in exercise and training. You know, how often do you do a crisis management exercise and you say, right, you're the first team, I want you lot to go home and think about coming in the second team? Or if you're doing a more technical exercise, what are we doing how are we going to work shifts? What are we doing to look after the people? You know, how many days are you going to work solid? No, you're to go home at 7 o'clock, say. You're not to go home at 10 o'clock at night, because people need their sleep and to think about it. So build those into your exercise and training. Think about it then. And I think this was quite a good one I picked out from the NCSE website, is debriefs to look at how people felt that just went wrong. And if you can kind of capture some of that emotion there, then you can use that for feeding into your plans, feeding into your responses, feeding into future exercises, feeding into future events. So, any questions there? We got Alan a question, not a question, just say, how did it feel to be burgled? The question is a terrific way of bringing the importance of how people should focus. I'll use that, thank you. Yeah, it is. I luckily haven't, but I know there's a lot of anger, and it can be very violating there. So yeah, good point, Alan. And from Julie got some great points. Just an observation, needs to be aware of mainstream media approaching random outside stop for quite Julie to and just yeah, I think that's it. Everyone gets taught to not to speak to the media, but you know, people like to have their 10 pence worth, or to go into social media to do those sort of things. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think there's an easy way around that. I think it's about setting the culture of the organization and people understanding why they shouldn't be calling it, because you know, if you're in the organization, of course you know what's going on, but if you're working in this part, you may not know what's going on the rest of it. So you might say, oh, it's rubbish and no one tells me anything, and you know, it seems to be absolute chaos there. And it might not be absolute chaos, it's just your impression. But actually, this is really a well-managed cyber response. It's just, that's your impression. Or this is the best it's going to get, you know, as good as it's going to get. Any more questions there? No, I think that's Andy. Anything else we need to do, or is that us?
No, that's all. So thank you very much, Charlie, and thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. As mentioned, we'll follow up with the recording and the slides and any other questions you have that come from today's session. Feel free to reach out and we can make sure they're answered afterwards. Thanks, everyone.